High in the frozen passes of the Alps, more than 2,000 years ago, an army was dying. Men who had grown up under the warm sun of North Africa and Spain now stumbled through waist-deep snow, their fingers black with frostbite, their eyes blinded by the endless white glare. The narrow mountain tracks were sheets of ice, and with every mile, men and horses lost their footing and vanished screaming into the ravines below. Somewhere in that staggering column marched creatures the mountains had never seen before and would never see again. Enormous war elephants brought all the way from Africa, their breath steaming in the thin and bitter air. And leading them all, refusing to turn back, refusing even to slow, rode a young commander with a single burning purpose in his heart. He was taking his army where no invader had ever dared to bring one, and he was doing it to strike at the most powerful city in the world. His name was Hannibal, and the city he had sworn to destroy was Rome. The story of how he came to be crossing those deadly mountains, and of the war he would wage for the next 16 years against a power far greater than his own, is one of the most extraordinary in all of human history. It is a story of genius and obsession, of stunning victories and a final, crushing defeat. It is the story of a man who came closer than almost anyone ever would to bringing Rome to its knees, and who was in the end undone not by any greater general, but by the patience of an enemy that simply refused to break. To understand Hannibal, we must first understand the world that made him and the hatred that drove him. In the 3rd century, before the Common Era, the Mediterranean was dominated by two rising powers. One was Rome, a growing republic in central Italy, disciplined, stubborn, and hungry for expansion. The other was Carthage, a wealthy trading empire based in North Africa, in what is now Tunisia. Carthage was old, rich, and powerful, its ships carrying goods across the whole western Mediterranean, its wealth built on trade rather than on conquest. For years, these two giants had circled one another, and at last they had collided in a long and brutal struggle known as the First Punic War, a war fought mainly at sea for control of the island of Sicily. Carthage lost that first war. It was a bitter, humiliating defeat, and it stripped Carthage of Sicily and burdened it with a crushing payment to Rome. Among the Carthaginian commanders who lived through that humiliation was a proud and brilliant general named Hamilcar Barca, Hannibal's father. Hamilcar never accepted the defeat in his heart. He believed Carthage had been betrayed by weak politicians at home rather than beaten on the battlefield, and he burned to restore his nation's power and to take revenge on Rome. To rebuild Carthaginian strength, he led an army into Spain, rich in silver and fighting men, and began to carve out a new empire there that might one day rival Rome itself. And here we come to one of the most famous moments in Hannibal's life, a moment that would shape everything that followed. When Hannibal was only about 9 years old, his father prepared to sail for Spain, and the boy begged to come along. Hamilcar agreed, but first he took his young son to the temple and had him place his hand upon a sacred offering. There, before the gods, he made the boy swear a solemn oath that he would never, as long as he lived, be a friend to Rome. That childhood vow, sworn in the flickering light of the temple, became the compass of Hannibal's entire existence. He grew up in the army camps of Spain, raised among soldiers, trained in war from boyhood, learning the languages of the many peoples his father commanded. He was shaped, from his earliest years, into a weapon aimed directly at the heart of Rome. To grasp what this oath truly meant, you have to understand the depth of the wound that Carthage carried. This was not a nation that had been lightly defeated. It had been the richest and most sophisticated trading power in the Western Mediterranean, its harbors crowded with ships, its markets filled with goods from across the known world, its people proud of a heritage that stretched back centuries to the seafaring Phoenicians who had founded the city. To be humbled by upstart Rome, to be stripped of Sicily and forced to pay tribute like a beaten servant, was a humiliation that cut to the very soul of Carthaginian pride. Hamilcar and men like him did not see the peace as an ending. They saw it as a pause, a wound that would one day be avenged. And they poured that longing for vengeance into the next generation, into sons raised from infancy to believe that the reckoning with Rome was not a choice but a destiny. The rivalry between these two cities was not really about any single island or treaty. It was about which of them would shape the future of the Western world. Two proud and ambitious powers had risen at the same time on opposite shores of the same sea, and there was not room enough in that world for both of them to rule. Sooner or later, one would have to bend to the other. Everyone on both sides seemed to feel it, this sense of a reckoning that could be delayed but never truly avoided. And so the peace that followed the First War was never really a peace at all. It was an uneasy pause between rounds, a time for gathering strength and nursing grievances, while on both shores a new generation grew up, knowing that the great struggle was not finished, but only waiting. When Hamilcar died, drowned in a river during a campaign in Spain, command of the Carthaginian forces there passed eventually to his son. Hannibal was still a young man, but he had already proven himself a soldier of rare gifts, and the army loved him. Ancient writers tell us he shared every hardship with his men, ate the same plain food, slept on the ground, wrapped in a simple cloak among the sentries, and was always first into battle and last to leave. He asked nothing of his soldiers that he would not do himself, and in return they gave him a loyalty that would hold together through 16 years of war in a hostile land. This bond between the commander and his men was one of the great secrets of his success. Now in command, Hannibal set about completing his father's work. He tightened Carthage's grip on Spain, and then he took a step that made war with Rome inevitable. There was a city in Spain called Saguntum, which had allied itself with Rome. In 219 before the Common Era, Hannibal attacked and, after a long siege, captured it. To Rome, this was an intolerable act of aggression against a friend and ally, and the Romans sent envoys to Carthage demanding that Hannibal be handed over to them for punishment. The Carthaginian Senate refused, and so, in 218, before the Common Era, the two great powers went to war once more in the conflict history would call the Second Punic War. Rome expected to fight this war on its own terms. The Romans planned to attack Carthaginian Spain and to invade North Africa itself, using their powerful navy to carry the war to the enemy. What they did not imagine, what no one imagined, was that the enemy would come to them, and by a road no one believed an army could travel. Hannibal understood that he could not defeat Rome's navy at sea, and that Rome's true strength lay in the loyalty of the many Italian peoples who fought under her banner. His plan was as bold as it was dangerous. He would march overland from Spain, cross the mountains, descend into Italy from the north, and defeat Rome on her own soil. He hoped that a string of victories would shatter the confidence of Rome's Italian allies and cause them to abandon her, leaving Rome isolated and weak. It was a gamble of breathtaking scale. In the late spring of 218, before the Common Era, Hannibal set out from Spain with a great army, tens of thousands of infantry, thousands of cavalry, and a force of war elephants. The journey itself, even before the mountains, was a punishing ordeal. He had to fight his way through hostile tribes, force the crossing of wide and dangerous rivers, and hold together an army made up of many different peoples who spoke different languages and followed different customs. By the time he reached the foot of the Alps in the autumn, he had already lost a significant portion of his men, and the hardest trial still lay ahead. Winter was coming to the high mountains, the local tribes were hostile, and the passes were treacherous. Every sensible voice would have said that to take an army over the Alps so late in the year was madness. But Hannibal was not a man to be turned aside by the word impossible. What followed was the crossing that made his name immortal. For roughly 2 weeks, his army climbed into a white and pitiless world. The mountain tribes attacked them in the narrow passes, rolling boulders down upon the column and ambushing the stragglers. Paths gave way beneath their feet. Snow and ice claimed men and animals by the hundreds. At one point, according to the ancient accounts, the army was halted by a landslide that had destroyed the trail, and Hannibal's engineers had to carve a new path out of the frozen rock to get the elephants and baggage through. When at last the battered survivors staggered down out of the mountains onto the plains of northern Italy, Hannibal had perhaps only half the army he had started the crossing with. But he had done what Rome believed no one could do. He had brought a war elephant army over the roof of the world, and now he stood in Italy itself at Rome's undefended back door. It is worth pausing to picture the sheer strangeness and daring of what Hannibal was attempting. No general in living memory had tried to move a large army, with cavalry and baggage and elephants, across the towering barrier of the Alps. The mountains were not merely cold and high. They were home to fierce tribes who resented any intrusion, laced with narrow paths where a single ambush could destroy a column, and swept by weather that could kill an unprepared man in a night. Roman commanders felt safe behind that great wall of rock and ice precisely because they assumed no sane enemy would ever try to cross it. That assumption was the very thing Hannibal intended to shatter. His whole strategy depended on doing the thing that could not be done, on appearing where he was thought to be impossible, and so striking Rome a blow not only to its armies but to its confidence, to its very sense of what was possible in the world. The elephants deserve a word of their own, because they have become the unforgettable image of Hannibal's march, and yet their story is a sad one. These were not the huge elephants many people picture today, but a smaller kind, and they had been trained for war, meant to terrify enemy soldiers and horses who had never seen such beasts, and to smash through lines of men. Bringing them across the rivers and mountains was an ordeal almost beyond belief, requiring rafts, ropes, and endless patience. Most of them survived the crossing of the Alps, a testament to the care their handlers took. But the harsh Italian winter that followed killed nearly all of them, and Hannibal would fight most of his long war without them. They are remembered far out of proportion to the role they actually played, and yet they remain the perfect symbol of the man himself, of his willingness to attempt the extraordinary, to drag the creatures of Africa over the frozen spine of Europe simply because his enemy believed it could not be done. The Romans were stunned. An enemy they had expected to fight in distant Spain had appeared, as if by dark magic, in the north of Italy. Hastily, they gathered their legions to crush this impudent invader before he could do real harm. What they learned instead, in a series of shattering battles, was that they were facing perhaps the finest military mind the ancient world had ever produced. Hannibal did not simply beat the Roman armies sent against him. He outthought them, again and again, luring them onto ground of his choosing, springing traps they never saw coming, turning their own aggression and overconfidence against them. His first great victory came at the river Trebia in the cold of that first winter. Hannibal provoked the Romans into crossing the icy river early in the morning, hungry and chilled, and then fell upon them with fresh troops and a hidden force concealed to strike their rear. The Roman army was torn apart. The following year, in 217 before the Common Era, he did something even more audacious. Learning that a Roman army was marching along the shore of Lake Trasimene, he hid his entire force in the hills and morning mist above the road. As the unsuspecting Romans marched into the narrow ground between the hills and the lake, Hannibal sprang the trap. The Carthaginians came pouring down out of the fog, and in the space of a few hours, an entire Roman army of thousands was destroyed, cut down or driven into the waters of the lake to drown. It was one of the largest ambushes in military history. Rome was now gripped by fear. Twice their armies had been annihilated, and this foreign general seemed unbeatable. In their desperation, the Romans turned to an unusual man with an unusual strategy. His name was Fabius Maximus, and he understood something crucial: that Hannibal was nearly impossible to beat in open battle, but that he was far from home, without a secure base, dependent on a fragile web of supply and support. So Fabius refused to give Hannibal the great battle he wanted. Instead, he shadowed the Carthaginian army, harassing it, cutting off its foragers, denying it supplies, but always slipping away whenever Hannibal turned to fight. It was a strategy of patience and attrition, of wearing the enemy down rather than defeating him in a single stroke. Many Romans hated it. They thought it cowardly and shameful to watch an enemy ravage Italy without meeting him in battle, and they mockingly called Fabius the Delayer. They wanted a hero who would march out and crush the invader in one glorious clash. That impatience would soon lead Rome to the greatest military disaster in its entire history. In 216 before the Common Era, the Romans set aside the cautious strategy of Fabius and assembled the largest army they had ever put into the field, a force of around 80,000 men, determined to overwhelm Hannibal by sheer weight of numbers and end the war in a single day. The two armies met near a small town in southern Italy called Cannae. Hannibal was heavily outnumbered, and any ordinary general would have been crushed. What he did instead is still studied in military academies around the world today, more than 2,000 years later, as perhaps the most perfect battle plan ever conceived. To understand why these victories terrified Rome so deeply, You have to understand how Rome made war. Rome did not rely on a single professional army, but on a vast reservoir of citizen soldiers, farmers, and workers who took up arms when the Republic called. Its true strength lay in numbers and in the loyalty of the many Italian communities that supplied those soldiers. Hannibal knew this, and it was exactly why he fought the way he did. Every Roman army he destroyed was meant to chip away, not just at Rome's manpower, but at the faith of her allies, to make them doubt that Rome could protect them, and so to persuade them to abandon her. At Trebia and again at Trasimene, he had shown that Roman armies could be wiped out entirely. Each disaster sent a tremor of fear through Italy, and Hannibal watched carefully to see whether that fear would crack the foundations of Roman power. The strategy of Fabius deserves a closer look because it reveals a truth about war that the impatient never want to hear. Fabius understood that he did not need to defeat Hannibal. He needed only to deny Hannibal the victory he required. Every day that passed without a great battle was, in a quiet way, a day that Rome won, because time and numbers were on Rome's side, while Hannibal grew no stronger, so far from home. It took enormous discipline and courage to follow such a strategy, to endure the mockery of one's own people, to watch the enemy burn the countryside and refuse to be provoked into the fight he wanted. Fabius was willing to be called a coward in order to save his country, and in the long run his despised strategy proved wiser than all the bold plans of the generals who scorned him. History would eventually honor him with a title that turned the old insult on its head, remembering the delayer not as a coward, but as the shield of Rome. Hannibal arranged his outnumbered army with deliberate cunning. He placed his weakest troops in the center of his line and his best and most reliable soldiers on the wings, and he bent the center forward toward the enemy in a shallow curve, like a bow. When the huge Roman army crashed into this center, the Carthaginian middle slowly gave ground, falling back step by step, exactly as Hannibal had planned. To the Romans, it looked like victory. They pushed forward, deeper and deeper, packing themselves tighter and tighter as they pressed into what seemed a collapsing enemy. But it was a trap of terrible genius. As the Roman mass pushed into the retreating center, Hannibal's powerful wings held firm and then swung inward, wrapping around both sides of the Roman army. At the same time, his superb cavalry, having smashed the Roman horsemen, came thundering around to seal off the rear. In a matter of hours, the largest army Rome had ever assembled found itself completely surrounded, crushed together so tightly that many soldiers could not even raise their weapons. What followed was not a battle but a massacre. Tens of thousands of Roman soldiers died in that single afternoon at Cannae in what remains one of the bloodiest days in the history of warfare. Cannae was Hannibal's masterpiece, the crowning triumph of his genius. Rome reeled from the blow. Several of her southern allies, seeing the invincible power of Rome shattered, defected to Hannibal's side, exactly as he had hoped. The second largest city in Italy, Capua, opened its gates to him. For a moment, it seemed that the impossible dream might come true, that Rome itself might fall. And here we reach one of the great mysteries and turning points of the entire war. After Cannae, Hannibal did not march on the city of Rome. Historians have debated the reasons for more than 2,000 years. He may have lacked the heavy equipment needed to besiege such a mighty fortified city. His army, for all its brilliance, was not large enough to storm Rome and hold down the rest of Italy at the same time. He seems to have believed that his victories would force Rome to negotiate a peace. But Rome would not negotiate. And that, in the end, was something Hannibal had never truly understood about his enemy. For this was the astonishing thing about Rome, the quality that would prove to be Hannibal's undoing. After Cannae, after losing tens of thousands of men and watching allies desert, any other state in the ancient world would have sued for peace. Rome did the opposite. The Romans refused even to speak the word surrender. They raised new armies, enrolling younger and older men, even arming slaves. They returned, grimly, to the patient strategy of Fabius, avoiding the great pitched battle that Hannibal craved, and instead, slowly, relentlessly wearing him down year after year. They could not beat him, so they resolved simply to outlast him. And time, unlike any Roman general, was an enemy Hannibal could not defeat. The years dragged on, and Hannibal's position slowly weakened. He remained undefeated in battle, roaming up and down Italy, but he was like a lion trapped in a country that was slowly closing in around him. He was far from home, and the reinforcements and supplies he desperately needed from Carthage arrived only in a trickle, if at all. The leaders back in Carthage were jealous of him, or short-sighted, or more concerned with defending their interests in Spain, and they never sent him the full support that might have won the war. Meanwhile, the Romans went on the offensive elsewhere. They attacked and slowly conquered Carthaginian Spain, cutting off Hannibal's base of power and his source of fresh troops. One by one, the cities that had defected back to him were retaken and punished. The tide, so slowly that it was hard to see from one year to the next, had turned. Try to imagine the horror of Cannae from inside the Roman ranks, because the numbers alone cannot convey it. A soldier in that great host had marched out that morning full of confidence, one man among the largest army his nation had ever raised, certain that such overwhelming strength must surely crush the invader at last. Then, slowly, he would have felt the press of bodies growing tighter around him, the strange sensation of an enemy that would not break no matter how hard the front ranks pushed. He would have noticed, too late, that the sky to his sides had filled with the shapes of Carthaginian troops closing in, that the sounds of fighting now came from behind him as well as ahead. And then there would have been no room to swing a sword, no room even to fall, only the crushing, suffocating press of a trapped army being destroyed from every side at once. It was a nightmare made real, and it burned itself into the Roman memory for generations. For centuries afterward, Romans would speak of Cannae in hushed tones, the way people speak of a wound that never fully heals. There is something almost tragic in Hannibal's situation during these long middle years of the war. He had achieved the impossible and won victories that will be remembered as long as history is written. And yet all of it slowly turned to dust in his hands, not through any failure of his own, but through forces beyond his control. He needed his home government to support him boldly, to pour men and supplies into Italy to finish what he had begun. And instead, the leaders of Carthage hesitated and bickered and looked to their own narrow interests. A general is only as strong as the nation behind him, and Hannibal's nation, for all that he fought and bled for it, never truly rose to the height of the moment he had created. He had opened a door to victory with his own genius, and then watched, helpless, as those who should have marched through it stood still. The man who finally found the answer to Hannibal was a young Roman commander named Scipio. As a very young man, Scipio had survived the catastrophe at Cannae, and he had spent years studying his enemy, learning from Hannibal's own methods rather than repeating the mistakes that had doomed so many Roman generals before him. Scipio took command of the Roman effort in Spain and proved a brilliant general in his own right, driving the Carthaginians out of that country entirely. Then he conceived a bold plan of his own, a plan that turned Hannibal's own strategy back upon him. Instead of continuing to chase Hannibal around Italy, Scipio would strike directly at Carthage itself, invading North Africa and threatening the enemy's home. This would force Carthage to recall Hannibal from Italy to defend his own city. The plan worked. After more than 15 years on Italian soil, undefeated but unable to win, Hannibal was summoned home to save Carthage. It must have been a bitter journey. He had spent almost his entire adult life fighting to destroy Rome, and now he was returning to defend his homeland against a Roman army on African ground. In 202 before the Common Era, the two greatest generals of the age, Hannibal and Scipio, finally faced one another on the field of battle near a place called Zama. At Zama, the pupil defeated the master. Scipio had learned Hannibal's lessons too well. He neutralized Hannibal's war elephants with clever tactics, opening lanes in his formation through which the charging beasts harmlessly passed. And crucially, this time it was the Romans who had the superior cavalry, thanks to a powerful alliance with the Numidian horsemen of North Africa. In a reversal of Cannae, the Roman and Numidian cavalry drove off the Carthaginian horse and then returned to strike the rear of Hannibal's army at the decisive moment. The army was broken. For the first and only time in his long career, Hannibal had lost a major battle. And with that defeat, the Second Punic War was over. Carthage was forced to accept a harsh peace, surrendering its navy, its territories, and its power. The long struggle was finished, and Rome had won. Hannibal survived the war. For a time, he even worked to reform and rebuild his defeated city, showing that his brilliance extended beyond the battlefield into government and statecraft. But Rome never forgot him and never stopped fearing him, even in defeat. Under Roman pressure, he was eventually forced to flee Carthage and spend his final years in exile in the east, moving from court to court, always with Rome demanding that he be handed over. At last, cornered, an old man with nowhere left to run, Hannibal chose to die on his own terms rather than be paraded through the streets of Rome in chains. He took poison, and with his death, one of the most remarkable lives in all of history came quietly to an end, far from the home he had fought so long to save. So what are we to make of him? This man who crossed the Alps and shook the greatest empire of the age to its foundations. Hannibal was, beyond any doubt, one of the supreme military geniuses of all time. His victory at Cannae is still taught to soldiers today as the ideal of what a battle can be. He held an army together in an enemy land for 16 years through sheer force of will and the devotion of his men. And yet he lost. He won nearly every battle and still lost the war because he faced an enemy whose greatest weapon was not a sword but an unbreakable refusal to give up. Rome could be beaten 100 times and would simply rise again, while Hannibal, for all his genius, needed only to be truly beaten once. There is a hard and lasting lesson in that. Brilliance can win the battle, but it is endurance, patience, and the sheer refusal to surrender that most often win the war. Hannibal was the greater general. Rome, in the end, was the greater power because it was the one that would not break. And perhaps that is why, 22 centuries later, we still speak his name with awe. He reminds us that it is possible to be the finest of your age at what you do, to do things no one believed could be done, and still, in the end, to fall, defeated not by a better man, but by a will more stubborn than your own. There is a poignant story told of Hannibal in his later years, whether true or not, that captures how history remembered him. Living in exile at a foreign court, he was asked by his host, in the presence of the Roman Scipio who had defeated him, to name the greatest generals who had ever lived. Hannibal named Alexander the Great first, then the Greek king Pyrrhus, and then himself. His host, surprised, pointed out that Hannibal had, after all, been beaten by Scipio, who stood right there. So where, then, would Hannibal have ranked himself had he won at Zama? Above all the others, Hannibal is said to have replied, above even Alexander. It was not merely pride. It was the answer of a man who knew exactly how close he had come, who understood better than anyone that the margin between the greatest victory and final defeat had been agonizingly thin, and who carried to the end of his days the knowledge of what he had almost achieved. It is worth remembering, too, what became of the losing side, for it shows how high the stakes had truly been. Rome did not forgive, and it did not forget. 2 generations after Zama, in a third and final war, Rome would return to finish what it had started, besieging the great city of Carthage, burning it to the ground, and erasing it so completely from the earth that for a long time little remained but memory and ash. The struggle that Hannibal had waged was, in the end, a fight for the very survival of his civilization, and his civilization lost. That knowledge lends his story its final weight. He was not merely a brilliant soldier chasing personal glory. He was the champion of a doomed cause, the last and greatest hope of a proud people who would ultimately be swept from history altogether. When we marvel at his crossing of the Alps or his masterpiece at Cannae, we are watching the finest efforts of a man trying and failing to hold back a tide that would eventually drown everything he loved.